Today, we are excited to share a conversation with Jalisa, who took on the challenge of running in-person overnight camp during the COVID-19 pandemic. Through her creative and innovative style, she led her team to beat the odds and flourish. There were challenges and pieces of the puzzle that were beyond her control, that they overcame each day with success and pride. As Jalisa says, she thrives on confrontation and challenge, chewing them up like a dragon and spitting them out stronger and more resilient than ever before. If there was ever anybody who was up for the challenge of this summer, it was her. You don't want to miss this conversation.
Before we get started with today's show, we've been talking a lot about how we are feeling and what we assume you may be going through. But we want to know what you are going through, how you are feeling, really feeling. You can send your thoughts to Beyond Camp at gocamp.pro, and we will discuss it live on a new segment coming soon.
Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we are here to burst that bubble. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives, and we're excited to delve into those. We are your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we are here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. We're thrilled today to be hosting a conversation with Jalisa Danhof, who is an innovative and progressive camp pro and director at Camp Newaygo, an all-girls sleepaway camp in northern Michigan. She's also a committee member of Buckeye Leadership Workshop, the chair of the National American Camp Association's EPIC, Emerging Young Professionals in Camping Group, and was the Jack Weiner Leadership Award recipient from ACA in 2017. Welcome, Jalisa. We're so excited to have you.
Hello, thanks for having me. I can't wait to talk to you both.
You've had an exciting summer because you ran in-person programming.
Yep. It was great. We just finished 7 weeks of in-person program this past Sunday on August 3rd. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you, that would be a typical summer for folks, but this is a brand new thing, or a very unique circumstance for a lot of people this summer who aren't running in-person programming. So we're really excited to hear about that. We'd love to hear about your journey into full-time camping.
Sure. So I started in Florida 4-H camping as a young camper. I won a scholarship in the 4th grade after winning a speech contest, and my prize was a trip to summer camp. And that first week of camp, I was like, this is it. This is what I was made for. I have peaked. This is everything I want to do. And in my 5th grade yearbook, when you got to pick, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? My little future career is written as camp director. And I was like hook, line, and sinker from then on. So I worked at my home camp until I was in my early 20s. I got a degree in camp administration from Florida State University. And then I presented at an ACA conference out in California in 2011, thinking that no one would come to my session. I was a really young, new graduated student. I had like a packed room, was super nervous. And in that session was then the executive director at Camp Newaygo. And afterwards, I jokingly was like, and I'm headed to grad school this fall because I'm poor and we're in a recession unless somebody wants to hire me. And then Jane, our executive director, said, hey, have you ever thought about moving to Michigan? I was like, no, where's Michigan? Is that up north somewhere? And I'd never seen snow, like never lived up north. And I thought I would come to Camp Newaygo, work a couple of years, and then like bounce to another camp, kind of like, you know, you try to find your spot. And I got here and I was like, nope, this is perfect. I'm in for they'll carry me out in a stretcher. This is perfect. And so just absolutely loving Camp Newaygo. This is my 10th summer here.
Wow, what an incredible journey. And kind of sounds like the dream journey for a lot of people to just be able to say to a room of camp pros, like, hey, I'm looking for a job. Who can help me out? So congratulations. That's fantastic. So you said that you ran in-person programming. You've had 2 days to rest, so I'm sure you're fully recovered and ready to dive into this conversation here. Can you tell us about the decision and walk us through a little bit the process for your organization through the period of uncertainty that led you to in-person programming?
It was really tough. And I definitely want to start the conversation by commending any camp that decided to cancel. I think there was a lot of negativity early on within our industry of, if you do run, here's all this judgment. If you don't run, here's all this judgment. And I think we all need to get to a place beyond this where we continue to do what we've always done as an industry, which is support each and every site, each and every program, knowing that everyone's coming to this with different backgrounds, different challenges. And so I want to commend all of my friends that didn't run camp and felt it was the safest decision for them. For us, we started having the conversation in March, basically as soon as we got back from the ACA National Conference this year, which seems like bizarre looking back that we were all in like San Diego and fine, and everybody was in a big group, and like, you know, yay, Michael Brandwine, everyone was A-okay. And then in March, I remember we were getting ready to hire our camp nurse for the season, you know, gearing up, huge registration numbers. We had the highest registration we've ever had at this point. You know, we were up 75% from the same time last year. And then the virus hit and we went on lockdown mid-March. And we had to make all of these decisions kind of over Zoom. Even though all of our staff live on site, we all still were working from home. And so we would have meetings out on my lawn, like in this like big field spread out and over Zoom to make this decision. And I think what it came down to is we had all of these like worst case scenario options. And in our worst case scenario, even the worst case scenario still involved in-person program, but just for a group of 20 girls. And it was going to be like just me running it. And for us, that was kind of central, that we didn't, even if we hadn't gone for in-person programming, we would have canceled altogether. We would not have done like a paid virtual option. We might have done some free virtual stuff, but part of our decision really rested with the state of Michigan and trusting those officials to make a decision that would be in our best interest. And if they had said, you can't run, that would have decided it for us. But we felt like as long as they said you could run and here's how to do it safely, we were up for that challenge.
That's fantastic. And I just want to touch on a couple things you mentioned there. One was that you said, you know, that you have a lot of respect for people who canceled or people who chose to run. And I think it is really important that as an industry, we recognize that everybody has the child and the camper at the center of all of our decisions. Like, that's why we do this. None of us would do this to ever harm one of our campers. And we need to understand, you know, we've said this before, we're all in the same storm, but different boats.
Yeah.
The circumstances are so different, even, you know, like town to town, province to province, state to state, et cetera. And so we really need to keep that in mind. And so this certainly isn't a space where we're passing any judgment on folks who wanted to run or folks who canceled or who went virtual. We're grateful for anybody who's engaging with kids during this challenging time in a safe way. And secondly, I love how much direction that you took from your state and from your government, because I know we've often said it's really important that you're following whatever directives are set out to ensure that folks are operating safely.
And part of what makes us unique is we're an independent, not-for-profit camp. So we have a parent organization called True North Community Services. We used to be a YWCA camp, and in 1995, camp was going to be sold for like waterfront mansions, and alumni physically like stood in front of bulldozers to keep camp from being logged, and in about a 2-week period raised up enough money to buy back Camp Newaygo from the YWCA. They didn't want to run it, they just wanted to keep it a girls' camp in perpetuity, and they gifted it to this local small not-for-profit whose CEO was a camp director here for 25 years. So it's been like a perfect partnership with that local not-for-profit that's also independent. It's not religiously affiliated. It's not tied to a larger organization. So for myself, like, I have a board of directors at True North, but they really cede my guidance to say, what do you want to do? So with any of this decision making, I wasn't going to my board and saying, well, what would you like me to do? I was saying, here's my options. Here's what I think we should do. Do you agree? And they were like, well, I don't know. What do you think? We trust you. And I was like, okay, great. Like, so that's really hard too, right? You know, I'm not beholden to decisions of other people, but then like that judgment rested really heavily on the shoulders of myself and my senior leadership to try and portray accurately like all of the many facets of the pros and cons of moving forward with in-person program.
Yeah, I can see that. That's hard to kind of take that weight. I know I've been in similar, those independent nonprofits, and they're like, we trust you, and which is great. And it's to have that autonomy for your programs is really amazing, but I also find it kind of adds a little bit more interaction in between your personal and professional life. So when you think about it, you've just kind of walked us through kind of that uncertainty of your professional side of it. How did you manage it personally?
I thought this question was really funny because I was like, fine. I was like, uncertainty does not bother me at all. Like, I live in the world of like, who knows, it's gonna be fine. Like, I'm a very like positive, enthusiastic, like big dreamer, creative person. I always tell my staff that I thrive on confrontation and challenges. Like, I just eat it like a dragon and then spit it back out stronger than before. And so it's like that kind of stuff didn't worry me at all. I think what was the challenge for me. Our big holdup with any of these decisions was for us running in-person programming was really contingent on camper and staff testing for COVID-19. We were like, we have to have everybody tested, and that we had no control over. Like, and so feeling like, okay, well, we've made our decision that this rests with this one piece of information and this like structural logistical key, but if that key isn't available, if there's not enough keys to go around, if the key takes too long to get back from the key shop, like what are our options moving forward? And so the uncertainty didn't bother me, but the lack of control in every aspect to then make the decision a reality, that's more of what I struggled with. That like, well, I'm not yet the president of the United States, so I can't make this happen. And I don't have ownership of the CDC, so I can't tell people what to do. Like that was really hard, because as a camp director, you're used to being able to say like, oh, I can just make this decision and then I can do everything to make it happen. I don't have to depend on anybody bigger than me to make it happen. And so testing was really hard. So once we figured that out, then it was like, okay, I'll do the hard work. I'll do the rest as long as we have this available. So that was really like a last minute, like bottom of the ninth kind of saving grace, was our access to testing in Michigan.
Interesting. That sounds like a lot of weight to kind of just take in and be like, okay, but I can't do anything with it. It's just sitting with it. Did that like cause you any additional personal stresses, or just kind of, did you eat it up and spit it back out?
No, it was fine. It was more so like frustration of like, why aren't I in charge? Like if I did this, it would be so much more efficient. Everyone would be so much happier and motivated. Like we'd all work in harmony. Like, can I have your job for a bit and fix what I need for my job? And then I can come back to my job and do that. Like that's more of the like unhealthy attitude that I took when dealing with others outside of my immediate institution. But we made it through, and everyone I talked to was very helpful. And I think when you explain to them what you're trying to do with summer camp, that's even if they haven't experienced summer camp themselves, like it's such a wholesome model for like everything that's good in the world, that it's a really like uniting force. And I have never met a person that thinks that like summer camp is a bad idea. Like not necessarily in light of COVID, but like in general as a concept for humankind. Yeah. Everyone's like, yes, this is lovely. And so people really wanted to help us and wanted to work towards that. So yeah, the uncertainty wasn't a problem, but the lack of controlling all of the steps to get to the decision once it was made, that was challenging.
Interesting. I really like that. That's kind of how you frame it, as more of a challenge versus a struggle or a problem. Gives it more of a way that you can overcome that challenge with time, even when it is out of your control. So you're in programming, like that's a lot to take on, especially this year. Do you think running in person and then having a global pandemic affected your identity in any way? And like how you view yourself?
For me, it didn't. You know, it allowed us to do some different things that we've not been able to do before. So some changes that I'd always thought like, oh, this would be a really cool twist on this tradition, but this tradition is so sacred, you can't touch it. You know, it's got to be done the same way. And so a lot of surprises happened within our program. So I think my identity within the staff has always been one to push boundaries, to bring new ideas, to be open to feedback. And I think I continued within that. I think the hardest thing for me is I'm someone who likes to be out and about. I like to interact with campers. I like to be close within the program and make sure that I'm supporting everybody, and just constantly having to remind myself to do that at a safe distance, to have conversations outdoors. It made me plan things out and be less spontaneous, which wasn't the most like fun way to live summer, to have to be so planned and so like logistically perfect so that there weren't any, you know, crosshairs or any two people in one space. But I don't feel like my identity as a professional or my personal identity was like sacrificed. I looked at it as, you know, if this risk pays off, I'll come out of it stronger and more resilient.
I think it's fascinating how you described yourself in your relationship with your staff, is that you thrive on like confrontation and challenge. And so that must have been a really neat way to lead your staff through that. And so that must have really aligned well, it sounds like, with how your staff already identified you and how you saw yourself fit within the team there.
They're definitely a group of like strong, passionate women. And I think if you can, you know, like Simon Sinek always says, if you can unite everybody behind your why, like they will work blood, sweat, and tears. It's not for you, it's for the why. And so like if you go out not saying, hey, do this for me, this is all for me, you know, if you do it and say, I'm doing this because I care so much about these kids and this experience, they're here for it. So I wasn't worried about the staff committing to quarantine. I wasn't worried about the staff cleaning toilets in front of every camper, wearing their masks when I told them to. All of their questions were more so, you know, how do we do this? Can you show us the logistical pathways? You know, give us the guidelines, tell us what to do, and we'll follow it to the end of the earth. And they really did. So you have to have a lot of trust in your staff, and we're lucky to have such a passionate group that works for us, but not everybody was able to commit to that. And so we had an overage of staff, and we were able to lose some who couldn't make the commitment or who have health risks. And that was really hard. But I'm grateful for everyone who worked really hard, and those that couldn't be here were still supportive of the path that we took, because it was benefiting the kids, because it was for the greater why. It wasn't for our own benefit. And when we made the decision, something that was really hard early on is we said, let's take finances out of this decision making. Like, we're not going to base this decision on finances, which we're lucky enough to be able to do at Camp Newaygo, and not everybody is able to do that. But we said, okay, if finances aren't the concern, if we're doing this based on the mission, how do we move forward? So I think we had good leadership this summer. I think the staff were super on board, and yeah, it took an army to make it happen.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love that you mentioned that TED Talk. I was actually just watching it earlier this week for a course that I'm taking. And so we'll drop that TED Talk into the show notes, because it's fantastic and so powerful for camp. You know, once you can all get behind the why and the reason of why you're doing it, it's much easier to get folks on board and into doing the things that are less than ideal, like cleaning toilets far more frequently than usual. So here at Beyond Camp, we like to dive into the tough stuff, we like to say, and get a little bit vulnerable. So if you're willing to share, we would love to hear what caused you the most stress this summer. And let's start with, like, professionally speaking. You've named a lot of things that sound quite challenging. What caused you the most stress?
I think it's a big one. For me, I thought, if we run in-person program and there's an outbreak here at this camp, and this not only tanks Camp Newaygo and our organization goes down with, like, me as the director, it also tanks my career in camping forever. Like, I'm not going to be able to go work at another camp, because they're going to ask me, where did you work before this? I'm going to say, oh, that camp that had a COVID outbreak and I didn't handle it well. You know what I mean? So it was like the worry not only of my current organization, but any future prospects of, like, am I tying myself to this? And if this is the stake I burn on, how long do I burn? Like, that kind of a pressure. Just fine.
Wow, that's so much. Yeah, so much to grapple with. And those are things that I had never considered. And I say that because here in Ontario, the decision was made by the government that overnight camps wouldn't run. So I hadn't considered my, like, professional career if I did run camp and things took a turn.
And that's not to say any camp that's dealt with a struggle, that's not to say that any of those staff members wouldn't be fantastic hires in the future. You know, by all means, I don't want to pass any judgment on any camp that's dealt with the struggle. I can't imagine being in their shoes. But that was the worry for me of, you know, I can imagine that this question for camp professionals is going to come up on future interviews. You know, how did your camp handle the summer of COVID? You know, or tell me about a time where you as a camp professional had to be resilient, or you had to overcome a challenge like COVID, for instance. And so I thought to myself, like, oh man, if this ship goes down with me as the captain, like, how do I ever recover from this in the stratosphere of camp?
And I think that that's a valid concern. Even if it was not your fault at all, these things happen. We're living in unprecedented times, as you might have heard. Yeah, I think it's still a valid concern. And I think that there will be a lot of folks out there that worry about that. And I think it's important that whether or not you ran camp or had an outbreak or didn't, that as camp professionals, we're assuming positive intent in folks, and that we did all try our best. And there was so much out of our control this summer. So what about on a personal level, especially at overnight camp? Our lives are so intertwined. What was the biggest personal stress for you in all of this?
Well, I have my son on camp all summer, who's about 1.5 years, baby Calvin, who's just like a joy. And we have a nanny who's here all summer that we hire through camp, who's one of my former staff members that I just adore. And this is her second year working with baby Calvin. And last summer with him as, you know, a young baby, I was used to him going to any staff member he wanted to and really encouraging him to be in lots of program spaces, to get out and about, you know, and this summer I find myself, you know, a lot of the rules were in place where only nanny Lilka could hold him or myself could hold him. He couldn't go to other staff members, you know, he couldn't get close to campers. Other campers couldn't even touch him. And so that was hard because that's not how I live my life. I'm not a very like helicopter, you know, like OCD person. I'm like, rub dirt in it, you're fine. Like if you're bleeding, that's, you know, the universe's way of saying you're still alive, keep going, capture that flag. Like I'm a pretty like tough it out kind of person. And even with like flu season, you know, I'm full science, like get the vaccine, but I'm also not like, oh, we got to wash our hands every 5 seconds a day. Like that's just not my personal type. And so to have to switch gears and be like, for the good of camp, I now have to be very worried and very paranoid that this adorable little baby is just like a vector that could like pass coronavirus to everybody who touches him, made me a lot more conscious of like where he was and where he could be. And that was definitely, it's not fun. Like I don't like feeling that way. Even yesterday we were at a playground and there was another little boy and I was like, I don't want him playing with that little boy. And how awful, because I'm someone who like assumes the best of people and strangers are just friends we haven't met yet. You know, like that's how I approach any new person that I come into contact with. But in the age of Corona, you really can't do that and you really shouldn't. So to have to switch gears for Calvin was hard. And I didn't want any of that to pass off to him long term and for him to get a sense that that's how I was feeling. So it was a matter of being aware of it, but trying not to let any of that anxiety show and just say like, oh, I know, I'm sorry you can't hold him, but at the end of the summer, once all of our tests come through, like we'll all give him a big hug before we go, you know, like that kind of stuff of trying to phrase it in the positive. And in my head be like, Lil, go wash his hands, that kind of stuff. So it was, yeah, personally, that was a shift I had to make in my consciousness.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the pandemic has really provided a whole unique set of challenges to parents, and it's not a lived experience that Cassie or I have. And so I'm grateful for you for sharing that experience, especially in the summer camp setting. That's pretty unique. Have there been any unexpected stresses for you this summer? Things that you were like, this will be fine, and then it felt less fine?
I think how much time I've had to spend this summer on thinking through fall programs and like additional business. So we're talking a bit before we started the podcast about like new ventures that Camp Newaygo is getting into. We are quite a popular wedding venue. We have about 20 to 30 weddings a year at Camp Newaygo. And that's a massive chunk of our income. People will pay stupid money to get married at your fancy camp. And so we have a weekend wedding every weekend in the fall during our change days in the summer. And under Michigan restrictions right now, rightfully so, you can only have 10 people indoors as part of like a wedding setting. Well, no one wants to get married with a guest list of just 10. That's not the dream wedding that they've all had. And so to be a good business, we're shifting all of those reservations to 2021 or giving full refunds, which is a massive hit for us. So then it's a matter of like, well, then what can we do safely to bring in business? So trying to think through like new ventures, trying to update website pages, trying to get information out there, and then suddenly shifting and being like, now I'm going to go run Gold Rush. So I got to go quick, get my costume from the costume closet. And then I'll come back and set up that Spanish immersion session and Ultra Camp again. You know, like it's just, I'm used to in the summer being able to focus on like the here and now and having everything for the fall set before I go into the summer season. So it's just a few like update emails to user groups and then transitioning to like outdoor ed and our weekend weddings. And it's very like consistent in the fall and I know what to expect. And now the fall is like wide open weekends that we suddenly are like pressured to fill for income, but no one wants to book anything because everyone's scared to go out and be with other people. So it's this big challenge of what do you do? So trying to brainstorm new business while also running like evening programs and like like zipline is just like, it's like you're trying to work your right and your left brain at the same time. And it was definitely a challenge and caused stress. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's wild. That must be so stressful because like I feel like in the summer I have the capacity for the summer, like you said, like the here and the now, and not a whole lot of energy for anything else, even sometimes for all the tasks I need to complete in that day. So kudos to you for being able to juggle both and switch between that like future mindset and the present as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like that takes a lot of energy and like capacity to do that. And, that's a lot of work to take on. And then to add those extra stresses of personal and trying to manage and balance everything. But earlier you mentioned you made some adjustments and had to be more schedule oriented to make sure your interactions were really positive and safe to your role, to complete your role this summer. Were there any other adjustments you had to make to be successful in your role this summer?
So part of this question is interesting because my role changed this summer. So I got promoted to camp director this past year. So what a year to take on the weight of camp onto your shoulders. So my role had already changed in the summer, in that our executive director, who's still here, who's fully working on donor development and like alumni relations, being in the at-risk category, she really couldn't be on camp at all. And she had already said, hey, like all the decisions are up to you. Like I'm not planning on being here for parent closings when that was going to happen. And I'm not going to really be here for check-in and check-out days. I was like, that's fine. Okay, that's cool. But now to run like a Corona careful program without any like in-person support, other than the executive director being like, you've got it, let me know if you need anything, like that was very different for my role. So being the person that like made all of the decisions. Like if there was a decision that needed to be made, I made it and then told someone else what that decision was for HR purposes. Like that's basically how we ran the whole summer. So you definitely deal with like decision fatigue. So by the end of the day, I would get home to my husband and he would ask like some question about like laundry. And I'd be like, no, I don't have any. You've got to make all decisions as soon as I walk through this door, because I have no more decision-making like energy left in my body. So that was definitely hard, because in a normal summer, the decisions you have to make, the structure of camp is already in place. But even for us, we were living through these changes. You think going into camp, I'll map out like every possible scenario, and you do to like a concept, but then you're confronted with situations you didn't expect to have to recover from. So as an example, like my staff were required to quarantine on site all summer. They could not leave camp at all. Well, several of my staff had cars and they were getting a little stir crazy. So they would ask like towards the end of the summer, hey, can we just drive around the lake? Like my car is here. Can I take 4 people and we just get in the car and we drive around the lake? We won't get out of the car. We'll park it back at the bog house and then we'll walk to camp. What do? Do you say yes? Do you like force the staff to stay on site? Do you trust them to take the car and not get out of the car? Who's going to know if you say yes or if you say no? No one. This is just your decision. It's like, how much of a risk are you willing to take on this one decision? And so it's like that kind of stuff of like, I don't know, like, what would you do? And there's no one to ask. Like, you don't get to turn next to you and be like, I don't know, what would you do? Like, you just got to do it. So having to make all of those decisions was new to the role, especially in a summer where like every day there was just constantly new decisions to make because we were creating a new program.
Yeah, it has me thinking too about how I would like call a mentor with those questions. But in this day, with this scenario, that mentor doesn't have the answer either.
Yeah. It's uncharted territory. You're flying blind. Yeah.
Yeah, like I always like to think back to like, when have I seen this before? Like what patterns can I draw from? And like, who's to say what's a good decision? Because there's no history. We have not lived through this before.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It was a lot, man, but we got through it. And I no longer feel decision fatigue. I'm ready to make all kinds of decisions. I'm good.
That's amazing. So you mentioned a little bit about how you went home at the end of the day and you're like, not making decisions here anymore. How do you think having a summer like that, where you had to kind of change how you run your personal life a little bit, affected your relationships with friends and family?
I was really lucky that I've got such a supportive family that understands entirely what I do. And like they've been groomed for me to do this, at least my immediate family, from when I was 10 years old. So like they know that when I plug into camp in the summer, like my priority is not you, and it will not be you until September. So like that, welcome to, like, that's just the way it is. And if you can get on board with that, we'll all live happily together. So like my parents live up here in Newaygo. They moved up after I moved up here, and they have a home on the lake right near my house with my husband. and they hosted a staff member for us very graciously, which was awesome for them because they have this lovely big house. But they agreed to quarantine all summer, and they got COVID tested before summer started. My in-laws, in order to see the baby, got COVID tests. And when grandpa headed up to the lake house up north to visit with some relatives, he had to have a COVID test again before he could come back and play with the baby. And so they all kind of bought into this and were willing to do whatever it took because they knew how important it was for me and how important it was for camp. And so I think all of them have at least expressed to me just how proud they were that we went for it, that we put in the hard work, and that we were so successful. And they really like to tout it and say, like, look at, like someone's doing this, like it's so hard, but someone's doing the hard work to make it happen. So I was really fortunate to have everybody in my family on board, and my amazing husband, who's just like the light of my life. That man, I cannot praise him enough for how hard he works. Like, what a dreamboat. And so he just supports me through all of it and is, so gracious and so wonderful about everything. So he's been wonderful and was able to talk to his work and work from home, at least through the end of the summer. And that's not easy. He doesn't work in camping, he works in finance and has like a real job, like in a big business in Grand Rapids. And, they're not as like flexible and fun and cheery all the time in his line of work. And so for him to go up the chain of command, to be able to be given that go ahead, there were a lot of people that made sacrifices on my behalf. So that then made me feel like I could be very present during summer because that's what everyone wanted from me. They were all making sacrifices and doing these things so that I could do my job well. So the least I could do was like commit to doing it as well as I possibly could.
That's amazing how you have that support system, because I know it's something that like in my past few summers here, I've struggled with. Like, I know my family knows, like, they're just not going to hear from me for a period of about 4 months. And they've come to, be okay with that. But sometimes it's still that they don't really understand why and how. Were there any changes to kind of your professional relationships through the midst of this?
This one was hard because for our year-round staff, there's a lot of uncertainty. And we've had a lot of year-round staff that we've had to transfer to other roles within our larger organization to help with the budget. We've had staff layoffs that we've had to make, and that's really hard. And so it's just so difficult to lose good people and to have to tell someone, like, I can pay you through this date in August, and no matter what kind of job you do, no matter how great you are, I have to let you go come this date. And that sucks. Like, that sucks to keep people motivated. That sucks to have to tell another person who you respect their work and like their love for this place. Like, that's really, really hard. And so I think for me professionally, I felt this sense of just like helplessness with them, that like no matter what I could do, I couldn't fix it in that moment. I couldn't enroll more kids in camp. I couldn't bring in enough business. I don't know what the virus is going to do this fall, so I can't guarantee where our budget's going to end up. So that was really hard to have such a close-knit group of people. We all live here, we all work together. And so we've been able to retain everyone's housing, which is helpful. We're able to do that for our staff members. But to lose anyone off of payroll and to know they're not going to have a steady income in a time where there's not a lot of jobs on the ACA job posting. And if your camp is facing financial hardships, there's not a lot of other places to look right now. And you just don't want to throw anyone into an economy that's going to chew them up and spit them back out again. And especially when they're really, really good people. So that was hard. And I think professionally for me within the office just made me feel for them and made me appreciate even more how hard they were working despite like knowing the inevitable.
I couldn't imagine knowing an end date was like looming. That would be hard.
Yeah. And it's tough. It's like you'd rather them know than be caught unawares. You want them to have enough notice to be able to apply for unemployment, to be able to know what they're capable of doing, how long they can stay around, to let them know your big picture view of when you want to bring them back and how that would happen and if it could happen. But then you don't want to have that conversation with them too soon before you have enough information to have that conversation. And then if you have it too early, if you have it before the summer, then the whole summer they're going to be dreading it. So it was definitely between a rock and a hard place with our year-round staff.
Wow, and what a challenging place to be in as a leader of those staff as well. it sounds like you handled that with a lot of grace, but it's certainly sounds challenging. Jalisa, I'm so grateful for how vulnerable and how open you've been with us so far, and we're so excited to continue on this conversation. We're going to take a short break here for our ad, and then we'll be right back with more with Jalisa. Inequitable access to professional development doesn't only impact the Camp Pro trying to increase their knowledge, but ultimately the children and adults they serve. This is why ACA Illinois is committed to providing free to low-cost professional development programs each year, because every child deserves to attend a camp where their director has the very best training, no matter their camp's financial situation. We know that camp pros always want better for themselves, their camps, their staff, and ultimately their campers. That's why we are so grateful to ACA Illinois for ensuring training and professional development resources are affordable and accessible to all camp pros.
During the pandemic, ACA Illinois has been a fantastic resource for professional development for camp professionals during what has been a challenging time for many of us. As we have both shared, we have spent some of this time furloughed or laid off and are grateful to be able to access trainings and resources at an affordable rate as we stay connected to the camp industry. As the summer hits camps harder and in a different way than most, ACA Illinois is committed to ensuring that financial barriers don't hinder access to trainings for staff. They recognize that this summer has presented new financial barriers and don't want those to get in the way of training or professional development. Elevate your camp and your career at acail.org.
So, Julie, we really dove into some like your personal and professional stresses before the break. So I'm thinking like if you were to look back to March and April when the pandemic was in its early stages here in North America, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Oh man. I wish I could say like, you're going to be fine. You're going to survive the summer with no cases. So just do it. Like that's basically what I would tell. I would give myself a crystal ball and be like, look, you did it. Like, don't stress. It's going to be fine like that. But then I don't know if I would have been as vigilant and then we might've had a case. So I don't know. I think, yeah, just encouraging myself to, I would honestly say like during quarantine, like March, April, and May, those 3 months were more stressful for me as an extrovert than like June, July, and August. So being like just in my house, even though we live at camp, so I have like a beautiful outdoor venue to quarantine in, it's still like not seeing other people, not seeing my coworkers every day, not being surrounded by like that amount of energy. Like that's definitely what I feed on. So that was really hard. So I think letting myself know like you won't have to do a summer without camp, because that was my big worry is like I just don't know how I would have functioned and come out of this okay if I hadn't done in-person program. I think I would have just like gone crazy. I don't know. Yeah, I would have done so many home improvement projects. And so I don't know. I think it was much harder to not do camp because as someone whose entire identity is tied to like being a camp director, you know, like when people are like, oh, tell me about yourself. I'm like, well, I'm a camp director, I'm a mom, I'm a wife. Like, that's it. Like, that's those 3 things are all you need to know about me to like build a picture in your head. And so to lose one of those 3 things, that to me would have been a greater shock to my identity than anything else.
Yeah, that's fair. And I appreciate you sharing your perspective as an extrovert because I think Cassie and I both shared that we feel pretty introverted. So during this time, we're like, oh, like, okay, we feel like good about a book or like going for a walk or something. But I know that it must be even more challenging for the extroverted folks who need that connection and that chance to be together. And then for introverted folks like Cassie and I, we've talked a lot about how camp provides so much of our social circle for us. And having the summer without that has like been this huge loss that we hadn't expected. And then we have funny moments. I know for me, I thought one evening we would go to like a Toronto beach, my partner and I, to go for a walk, not thinking about the fact that it had been 30 degrees all day. And it was a Saturday. So of course the entire city was at the beach and it was not this like peaceful walk I had created in my head. And I was like, I don't know what people do in this city during the summer. Like, this is embarrassing. I lived here my whole life.
Yeah.
So, you've talked a lot about your relationship with the staff and you've had to be so close with them this summer, being at camp and living with them and quarantining there. How do you think we can be intentional in our role modeling of how we handle ourselves during this pandemic and during the summer to our staff and to our campers?
I think just not letting yourself get overwhelmed. I think for me, like as a strong female leader, I take a lot of pride in always trying to arrive at any decision with like passion, enthusiasm, thoughtfulness, and advocating that like women can do this. Like you don't need a man to sit there and make this decision for you. So I think role modeling that alone for my staff members is a pretty strong thing to do. And then for them, you know, they all saw the sacrifices that we as a year-round staff were making. You know, we weren't leaving camp either. Like we weren't going out to other places. And so I think making sure that anytime you ask your staff to do something, are you also willing to do that thing? And staff that really matters to them. So any rule that I set in place or any guideline, I had to say, can I live within this? And if I'm not going to, what's my reasoning behind that of why I can do this and other staff members can't? So I hoped to role model being someone that was willing to jump through all the hoops, that like if you just do the hard work, that can pay off in a really, really big way. And also role modeling, especially for my staff, that you can be a working mom, that you can value raising your children and also really love your job. And that's something that I'm cognizant of every summer. And I want staff members to know that you can still be a great mom and love your job and do a very taxing job like camp and do that by involving your whole family. And you don't have to have this, you know, this dual person of like, I'm going to head home and be my home person. That's very different than my camp person. Like I just live, you know, Joe Richards says like, decide who you like better, the person you are at camp or the person you are at school, and then be that same person all the time. And I think that works really well. So I'm the same person all the time, and I'm lucky to have a support system that allows me to do that. So I think role modeling for all of my staff to be that person all the time and not letting yourself waver when it gets hard.
Yeah, I love that you brought up that parenthood piece again. I know that's something that Cassie and I have talked about bringing up in the future, because that is like part of one of those identities that intersects with our life as camp directors. And I think often as female camp directors, I worry all the time about what it would look like if we decided to have children and how that works with camp. And like, how do you do that? And like, yes, it would be adorable to have a toddler like parading through camp, you know, down to the waterfront, because I think toddlers are adorable in general, but also like, how does that work and how do organizations deal with that? And so what a fabulous thing for you to be able to role model to your staff, not only just during the pandemic, but in general. And I love how intentional you were about things. Camp is such a fabulous place for intentionality, as we know. And I think we needed it more than ever this summer.
Yeah, definitely. I believe have that parenthood one written down somewhere as coming up in the future. So I was going to say the exact same thing as Rachel. But as we talk about intentionality and living through the pandemic, what has been one of your biggest takeaways from the past? I've lost count of how many months this is now, but from being in this time.
I think just how grateful I hope to be in the future for when we're able to be in big concert venues together or large movie theaters or like theme parks. Like I'm someone who, because we all live at camp, we're not used to being around crowds. Like Rachel talked about going to that beach and being like, who are all these people? You know, we're used to, if we are in a crowd, it's the crowd of camp, or even at a camp conference where we still know a lot of the people. So to be in a crowd of strangers doesn't happen often, but I rarely feel unsafe in a crowd of strangers, particularly if I'm in outdoor space or like, you know, a theme park like that. I kind of enjoy as an extrovert being in places where I can see lots of other people. And now being in a space where I'm like, I don't know when that's going to happen again. Like, I don't know when I'm going to go to a movie theater again. I don't know when I'm going to go to a concert. I don't know when we're finally going to be able to take, you know, baby Calvin to Disney or even a Michigan Adventure right down the road or Cedar Point. And so I think not taking for granted all of those pieces, and then even thinking about travel, you know, and thinking through all the great times I had at the national conference in San Diego and being there and being like, yes, New Orleans next year. And now I'm like, I don't know, is that happening? Can anyone tell us? like what's going on? And so like, we probably won't travel for Christmas this year to see our families because our families are very at risk and it's a lot of older people. And should we really be flying across the United States on these crowded flights in December? Probably not. And so I think for me, it's like looking forward to, I don't like it when people say like, this is the new normal. Like, no, this is the new temporary. Like, it's gonna be fine. Like 5 years from now, it's not gonna look like this. Like 5 years from now, we're not gonna, you know, be in the same state of a pandemic unless there's another like highly contagious respiratory disease that spreads. Sure it could happen, but like, let's not plan on that. What an awful way to live your life. So like, this is the new temporary normal, but we will get back to a point where you can go to movies, where like there will be a vaccine, probably not this year, but eventually. Like, there are brilliant scientists that work very hard. Like, it's gonna happen. It's gonna take a long ass while, but when it does, won't it be great to like go back to Disney again? So I think I'm looking forward to like being grateful for that time and like appreciating it more. Like, I was never someone that was like in a big crowded space like the subway of New York, and I was never like, oh, look at how great this is, just to all be together in this enclosed little space. And now I'm like, maybe I'll find joy in those like little crowded moments where I never used to before.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned early on like that finding that moment of gratitude. What was something you've been grateful for this summer?
Just to see for the campers and staff, like how much they all needed it. And to know like our final campfire theme was, despite the odds, we flourish. Like, that was the theme that the campers chose. And for them to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, for them to talk about COVID-19 and how like everything was against camp happening this summer. So much of their spring had been such a disappointment. You know, there's very little in their life that they can count on as dependable. And for them to feel like they could come back to camp, and although it was different, it was exactly what they needed. And knowing that I was able to help make that happen for them, like, gave me such joy, because I thought, you know, there's still going to be a lot of stuff for them moving forward that doesn't happen as planned and might not happen at all. And if we're able to do this one thing, how much of a spark can that ignite? How long can those embers burn in each of these kids to keep them, you know, healthy and happy and okay for a little bit longer? And that was a really good feeling. So I know for our staff, it was very strange to go back out into the real world post camp, because we've very much been on this site, you know, literally had not left for 7 weeks. And so it was so strange to go out and to see other people. So I think finding gratitude in how safe we made camp feel this summer, and that all of the outcomes we hoped to achieve with our campers and with our staff, I definitely think were achieved.
I find that, yeah, we're on the go today. I like how you say, it makes me think like not only of like the physical safety, but the emotional safety attached to that as well. And how we can maybe use what camps who are operating through this time safely physically are managing the emotional safety as well to integrate into our, you know, typical camp environment.
Yeah, I got goosebumps when you said that, which is why I was so excited to say that, because I think we have lost a sense of safety, and I don't know that we recognize that. But I was watching a documentary the other day, and some people were like shaking hands and hugging, and I like immediately was like, they shouldn't be doing that. But then I was like, excuse me, Rachel, that was like 10 years ago. They were more than welcome to shake hands and hug. But that is weighing on us as a collective trauma. And so to be able to provide that as safe as possible for kids is remarkable. I think that's so important. As we look to the future, as you said, we're going to get past this. The world is going to continue. In 10 years, when you look back on this summer, what do you hope you're going to remember?
I thought about this, and I thought just the term, like, how badass we all were. Like, just the fact that like we did it. Like, reading about, you know, like Keystone and them running, and they were like, we ran during the, you know, polio and Spanish influenza, and we're running now. Like, I was like, that's so badass. Like, it's, you know, and not to say there's not a huge amount of like planning and preparation and logistics and like purchasing that goes into making all of that possible. But when I was trying to, for lack of a better term, like sell why to still come to camp this summer, we made a whole webpage called It's Still Camp, and said like, here's all the things that are going to be different, but you know what? It's still camp. And one of those pieces on there talked about how it's still going to have the feeling of camp, and how at our 150th reunion, when you come back with all the other alumni and they're like, oh, hey, what years were you on staff? You'll be able to say like, oh, I was there 2019 and Corona summer. I worked the year of Corona. And they're like, oh, no way. What was it like? Because no one else got to see it. And so we talked about for our staff, like you're part of this like elite group that like only you understand like what we went through, what we had to do, how it worked. And everybody's going to be so curious, like, how did you make it happen? Like, you know, like what was the schedule? Did you really have to clean every toilet between every camper? Are you serious? Like you had to stay with the whole co all summer? Like what was check-in like? What was checkout like? Like you're the only people who've seen this. And so that sense of like pride in the sacrifices that you made, but also being really excited to share how like cool it was that we did it, I think is I hope what people will remember, and that they'll be kind of respectfully amazed, at least, you know, because we did it safely, and also really thankful that there were people willing to put in all the hard work to make it happen.
I love that. That I think is a great spot for us to wrap up today on, you know, take pride in what you do, whether you operate, don't operate, run adapted programming, everything's valuable, and camp will still be camp. So we're going to dive into our recharge stations. Self-care is critical to personal wellness in the good times and the difficult times. It is also something we as camp professionals struggle with. How do you charge your batteries? What makes you feel inspired? Rachel, let's start with you this week.
This week, mine is really simple. Decaf tea. I've tried to switch from the like afternoon coffees to just a good cup of decaf tea. I find it's soothing because it's warm, but I can still sleep at night. And my family appreciates that I'm not just rambling on for hours in a caffeinated state. Jalisa, what are you doing these days to take care of yourself?
I'm a big podcast listener, but nothing that's like overtly educational or helpful, which I know is funny for the people listening to this podcast. I don't consider camping podcasts in that category. I consider them like a joy to listen to personally, but I'm a huge fan of the Office Ladies podcast. Like I'm a massive Office fan. Like I could quote like just watch it on loop. And there's an Office Ladies podcast where Jenna Fisher and Angela break down every episode of The Office, and we're into season 3. It's getting really good. We just did The Convict. I really cannot praise it enough, and it's just very well done. And so if you're a big Office fan, it's like the next best thing to just watching The Office, but you don't even have to open your eyes to do it. You can just do it while you take a shower or while you nap. It's great.
Oh, that sounds really fun. I have to admit, I've never seen The Office, but that might be the best way for me to absorb The Office. And for me this week, I do something with a friend. We call them walk and talks. So we both head out on walks at the same time in our respective time zones and get on a phone call together and connect. So phone somebody and, you know, get out there and do something. Thank you for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you are able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. As we wrap up, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with us. You can reach myself, Cassie, at cassie.bloy@stephanericard.ca. Jalisa, how can they connect with you?
They can reach me at Jalisa, Jalisa, at campnewaygo.org.
Rachel?
Folks can reach me at kentar@girlguides.ca.
So please be sure to check out our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. I think there's a couple interesting things that you're going to enjoy there specifically this week. We want to send a big thank you to Jalisa as she spent her time with us today after a season of leading her team through a summer of COVID-19 successfully with confidence, grace, and passion. To the Go Camp Pro team for holding space for these conversations, and the team at ACA Illinois for their sponsorship and continued support of this idea. To our producer, Matt, for ensuring we sound amazing every week. And to you, our listeners, for making the time to listen. Your dedication allows us to keep moving forward. Beyond Camp is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.